Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast where people leaders share their side of the story. We talk about the challenges they're facing, how they're addressing them, and what changes they hope to see as the workplace evolves. This podcast is sponsored by All Voices, the all-in-one employee relations platform. Hello, and welcome to HR Voices. I'm your host, Rebecca Taylor, and I'm here today with Jens Jensen, Vice President of People and Culture at Echo Americas. Welcome, Jens. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's my pleasure.
I'm very excited because I think that we've got an interesting topic for us to kind of dig into today. So, what we're doing here at HR Voices is we're exploring real and fabricated anonymized employee relations scenarios through the lens of experienced HR and people leaders. So we're going to be evaluating realistic workplace situations and demonstrate how they assess risk, apply judgment, and design practical responses. So our goal isn't necessarily to find a correct answer for anything that we're seeing here. It's more just to talk about what it's like when you're facing ambiguity, because most HR work works in sort of navigating that gray and that nuance and that ambiguity. And so today's scenario that we're bringing to you is actually from the headlines. So this is a real scenario that's existed in the real world. We're talking about it's a social media retaliation case of Sue versus Bevins. So the story is an employee settles a discrimination lawsuit with her employer, including a standard non-disparagement clause. After the settlement, she posts on social media criticizing the company's culture and treatment of women without naming the settlement or directly violating its terms. The employer alleges that she breached the non-disparagement agreement and sues her. The employee argues her posts are protected speech about workplace conditions and that the company is retaliating for her original discrimination claim. So this can get kind of messy, right? And so before we kind of even jump right to, the details and digging in of the specific scenario, what are some of the things that stick out to you first, Jens, when you hear this?
So first of all, just maybe put the context that I've most of my HR career worked globally and not with a domestic lens on. So first of all, I would say it sounds like first of all, it could happen everywhere, but it also sounds like a very US-based, because when it goes into lawsuits, particularly when employers threaten lawsuits, and say that wouldn't happen in so many countries. Then that being said, the situation where you make a settlement and the employee still posts something on social media, that could happen all over the world. And I think any HR leader or any executive better pay real good attention to those cases and see what others have done. Because I think, just speaking from my own experience, one is the frustration that immediately enters you as an employer. Hey, I thought this was done. I thought it was out of the way. I thought we ended in this settlement. And now it's right back at you. And it kind of like amplifies your frustration that it ends up being a boomerang case. I think also, I think another thing that springs to my mind is that, I don't know this particular case, but you got to understand what's the reach of that employee and which kind of social media, because unless it's like a TikTok star or an influencer, the reach is perhaps not that broad in the first case. But me as an employer or us as an employer, like doing a countersuit or lawsuit based on this, it definitely gives much more attention. So before, perhaps it wasn't even noticed, apart from a few friends and family and few other acquaintances. But when you then start with a lawsuit on it, then you put a big flashlight on it and perhaps a magnifying glass that you didn't want in the first place. So sometimes even if you are right and if you feel you're right, then it's allowed. But does that move the case forward in the right way? So those are the first thing that springs to mind. I haven't followed this particular case, so I don't know if there is an outcome yet. But I just think that is that balance we always sit in, that you may be 100% correct in your approach and you still shouldn't do it. And that's why I spend a lot of time with leaders and colleagues to say, it may be that you're absolutely correct and it may be that you end up winning in the court of law, but you can still lose. Just like, so was it really worth it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because, this person might have posted something on their Facebook where they had just, 100 of their family and friends there or something, right? And maybe it was a coworker who they were connected with or friends with that saw it and surfaced it. But to your point, how much reach could that really have had? And that is sort of the thing that you have to weigh is like, is this something that we want to take action on? And there's also, I think the bigger part of it is at what point does a company have a right to weigh in on what someone posts on their personal social media. This person's no longer an employee there. If they're, yes, they could sort of come at it as, well, you're talking about a workplace and we had an agreement that you weren't going to disparage us. But then it becomes, I think, well, what is disparagement? If someone's just sharing their experience working there, maybe that's sort of where it also can get, I think, a little bit rocky when you're kind of trying to figure out what to do. But I think your point of, do you even want to draw that much attention to it, is really kind of the first part to kind of really start to weigh.
Yeah, and if I may, I think adding to this, and this was when you and I we pre-discussed about this case, and I'm really happy to jump on it because if I'm used to working globally, my other aspects will be where's the colleague located in the first place? Because if it's not someone sitting within your domestic operations, we have so many remote employees these days. Which legislation are you even under? And you can't necessarily just even with good legal ties prevent them from saying anything because I've had situations during my career where we were looking at it from one lens, but then the colleagues were perhaps sitting in completely different legislation and different setup. So again, you may think you're right, and you're even from external counsel and guidance, you may even be told you're right, but it still doesn't mean that you can do anything about it. But I think it does bring up this concept as well as what is even what's even the free speech? Like, what's the right of that right now? And it's just very opportune timing considering what we're experiencing just these days and what's happening in the US right now. It's do we truly have free speech? Are you allowed to say these things? Don't we? And I think that's why cases like this, I think if I was presented with such a case, one thing is my own inclination to thinking that this is how to solve it. But the first thing I would do if I get some really good lawyers in and ask them, what do you see in this case of the good and the bad? Not just from the legal point of view, but also from brand impression and how this could influence the company's journey.
Yeah. And you're kind of going into, I think, the next sort of question that I'd have is, what are some of the first things that you'd want to understand about this case or about this situation? So you talked about, where is this person located? What legislation are they under in the first point? Now, I think consulting lawyers is always a great move, especially when it's specifically about an agreement that you had, right? They're claiming retaliation. You've got, a signed sort of agreement. So involving, the general counsel, at least of the company's, always a good move. What are some other things that you'd want to understand about the context of what's going on here?
I think we're try to work a lot in scenario planning. So we're saying you may have either a positive or negative outcome. Like either you win or you lose. You can start with that. But just going through the scenarios, what comes from winning and what comes from losing? Because that's not binary. Like it's not like you win and everything is just disappearing. As we talked about earlier, it could actually shine a bigger light on it in the first case. So you have actually many more people that now sees it because it's now on public record that you took this case. But I think that's the first thing that I want to try and clarify with the help of external counsel. Even if we win this case, what does the best case scenario look like? And if we lose this case, there's often more than one bad scenario as well. It could be that well, the employee doesn't have to give you any money back. They're not in breach of the contract, but still they're allowed to keep it up there. Okay, so that's which scenarios are we even talking about, and if it's possible, can I attribute a weight to the outcomes? Right, it's a little bit of just playing statistics. If it's 70-30, we're gonna win. Okay, within that, which of the scenarios are we actually looking to win? We often end up with these binary outcomes, but it's rarely binary. You can win with a loss and you can lose with a win, and it's just like that. That's what I'm trying to understand in the first place.
Yeah, it's like it's never usually that simple.
No, it's not. And then I try to put some value to like if I say if in doubt, follow the money.
Yeah.
But we do have legal cases. They occur when you have a business, but what is the time spent and therefore the money that you spend on this, not just the legal fees potentially. You may have in-house legal so you don't spend any extra. Fundamentally, you're going to take some colleagues' time and you're going to focus that on a past employee. So what else could they have spent their time on doing? And it is tricky because I think, your sense of fairness, that's really what's often being triggered. So you really want to get at it, But my energy, my colleagues' energy, the leader's energy, everyone's energy now has to go to something that is in the past. So what could you do by putting that energy somewhere else? That's
Yeah.
the cost that I'm trying to assess. And my team members are sometimes a little confused by that because it seems like you don't want to pursue what's right. Well, I do, but it has a sacrifice somewhere else. So is the sacrifice bigger? So I think that's what's in my mind, trying to really kind of like, and you'll see behind me, there's a whiteboard. I like to whiteboard them and just bring people into the room saying, talk me through those scenarios. What are we really looking at here? Sometimes you reach the conclusion it's really not worth it very early in the case. And you kind of like, you can be frustrated about it, or you can be annoyed about it. Perhaps you should have written that settlement even stronger language and all of that, but you didn't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
don't cry over spilled milk. Like move ahead and just move forward.
Yeah. I think there's also the content of the post is something that I'd want to look into too, right? So she's claiming discrimination and things that I think also could involve their own investigation too, right? So I'd kind of want to understand there's there's the posting on social media part, there's the possible, or non-disparagement violation, but then there's also well, what is she saying here? She's now someone who's raising this claim that it almost becomes two cases. There's the case of the post, and then there's the case of the claims themselves that I think need to be investigated too. And, I think we kind of need to look and see where there might be other patterns to sort of see, is there feedback from exit interviews that may have alluded to this too? I think that's kind of the part where that's enough smoke that there could be a fire somewhere. And I would think that that's kind of where you kind of also need to spend some time.
And I think that everyone has a limit. So there's got to be something you cannot let it slide. Like
Hmm.
depending on what it is, if it's, let's imagine there's named individuals of existing colleagues. You gotta go, and because now you have to take a stand on their behalf, right? So of course you need to look at it. But if it's more generic in nature, I just think it's what is this saying? Is like, don't wrestle with pigs because you'll both get dirty, but the pig likes it. And I think there's a little bit of that you get into a mud fight, but you just can't win it, right? If this and the world is full of keyboard warriors.
This is true.
And if it's an ex-colleague, that person has all the time in the world, you don't. So you really gonna throw like, so can you live with it? And sometimes you have to try and take a stand because you're sending a signal otherwise to the remaining organization that there's no limits and everyone can just like do whatever they want. And but you just really gotta go into saying, is this where you gotta throw your energy? And I think again, going back to the being mostly familiar with working in the global context, it's getting more and more and more tricky right now. You and I when we talked last time, we talked about this as a foreigner in the US and here on a visa, don't observe a fully free speech. So what I mean by that is right now, just to extend my visa, I got to ensure that all my social media is open for the state to review everything that I've said since I joined Facebook in whatever that was when it was created. And it has to go back there. And even if I can't screen and go back and see what I said, then the AI can do it. So I think also from employees or ex-employees perspective, I would still maybe I'd address it a little bit different and say, hey, even if you're absolutely correct, are you sure you want that as part of your personal brand? And sometimes people also say, hey, my employer treated me so poorly that I want to warn everyone else and it's part of my values. Okay. But I think social media is making it so easy for us to put our immediate emotions on the internet and now it stays there. So sometimes it's not about addressing it with a legal point of view, but simply reaching out to the former colleague and saying, hey, you can keep it there, but it just does not actually help you with a future employer.
Does this give you what you need? Does it give you what you want? And,
Yeah.
you know, I think there's like, one of the things I wanted to kind of talk through was like, what are some assumptions that we need to be careful not to make in a case like this? So I think that, one of the things that I would say is like, we can't assume that what they're saying is completely untrue, but we also can't go in and assume that it's sort of like this big announcement because it could, to your point, it could just be someone who's just feeling like they just want to say something that just get something out. Maybe it's the way that they feel. But I think that, you also can't assume that it's BS either, because it's part of the job in HR to do the due diligence to verify whether there is something. And you can evaluate data in hiring, in, performance management. You can look back and see, are there trends that might show some discrimination? But that becomes sort of, again, it's sort of separate issue. But I think like there's a lot that we need to make sure that we're not assuming and that is true or not true, and that we're really actually like finding what the truth is as close as we possibly can, right?
Yeah, and it just got me thinking there's also this that we just got to understand that the employee or the ex-employee could still post it somewhere just anonymously.
Yeah,
So you got Glassdoor and other elements today where you can write reviews on your employers, but you could just like not name yourself. And even if we have an indication of who we think it is, it's like we can never really prove that. So sometimes I think there's another fact that as employers, and I remind leaders from time to time, it's just much easier to behave nice as an employer or behave well as an employer. Because sometimes you have situations where actually they could be more right than wrong in their posts. Right. And it's not because your culture of your company is like that consistently, but they could have been under a leader that unfortunately displayed some
right.
poor values.
Yeah.
So I think this is the delicate balance where you walk as a HR. You also got to go back and say, well, do you understand why they posted what they posted? Whether or not they're legally entitled to? Are you sure you want another investigation in your organization because it may expose some of the leaders that you are paid to protect as part of protecting the organization? So there's, as you say, there's a lot of facts, and I think that perhaps is also very tricky because facts can be really, really tricky in these situations. Is often more perceived facts,
Hmm.
and then if you end in a court of law, it's even more like you're not even sure that the facts matter because it often depends on their opening and closing statements, what the judge or often the jury would vote. And so even those facts are not as relevant. Right? Not saying that there aren't open and shut cases, but something that is about social media, your right to free speech or disparagement in or non-disparagement in a settlement agreement. Oh, they get very tricky, and for me, I find that they often become a bit of a time suck. Now, again, I don't know what was posted, so everyone has a limit to what you can accept as an employer. But I think I observe we are often more prone to kind of like to go into the attack just because we feel that it's so unfair.
Hmm.
Now we even if we have the law on our back and our side, we just like, oh, we gotta go do that. And don't get me wrong, I have the exact same emotions. Like, hey, that's that's go do, but sleep on it for a few days and then ask yourself, does it still feel like the right thing to do? Because again, the fact that you have the case here as an example in a podcast, it talks about how much attention is created to the case, where just
Hmm.
let sleeping dogs lie. No one's gonna notice apart from a few of her friends. And even if there are employees that notice it, either they're aware that that was the culture, so
Yeah.
hey, they already know, or they're aware that that was a really challenging employee. So he or she would anyway post this kind of thing, and people would shrug and say, "Oh, that's what we expected that Jens would do when he got fired." So
Typical Jens.
yeah, typical Jens. Like so, why bother with all this energy? Now, I say it with a very different cultural lens because I know also from working in the US versus working globally or working in Europe, we are quicker to draw here, and what we draw is typically our lawyer.
Yeah. We're a very litigious country, very litigious community. Yeah. And I think that you're kind of, one of the things that you're talking about that I think is sort of worth kind of talking through is how you'd weigh some of the competing pressures.
Mm.
So you have the pressure of the resources on your team to act on this in the first place, right? Like to either handle litigation or to do the or to even start an investigation based on what the post is. There's the legal fees, there's the public perception of your brand. So how do you weigh some of these competing pressures?
So I still try to do like a financial risk assessment and just like but that's where the legal fees goes into. I think the financial risk assessment it ends up not being the key priority in this. I think it's more about first of all what are you diverting your resources from? So what will now not get done? And right now, I would say the company I'm with right now, it's a turnaround case. Like, and you have very rigid priorities. Every resource matters, and what you put them to is like you gotta constantly prioritize. Do we do A or B? So if we do B, and this is the lawsuit here and pursuing that, we're not doing A. And I think that that's a higher priority than looking at the just dollar amount that's spent on the case in the first place. I think also it is extremely tricky because a lot of what we're doing in HR organization is very difficult to put a value to. But what's the brand value and the employer brand value of doing versus not doing? And it just goes back to that if the post is so offensive to the existing organization that you cannot live with having it out there, when people Google Echo, they're going to find out, oh, this is the first thing that pops up. You got to do something because it erodes brand value and employer value proposition for new talent to come in or for the exist to feel respected. But I think that you got to turn that around and saying, is it really that? Does it really matter that much? So I simply try to attribute a value to each element. In the end, I think the dollars speak pretty well. Right. So what's
Yeah.
the cost of shifting the team away from here? What will not get done? And even if we can't give it a direct dollar value, we approximate. So what will now not get done? In the end, you just
Yeah.
gotta ensure that doing has higher value than not doing.
Yeah.
That's how I walk through. It is not easy because a lot of it just has to be built on assumptions. Particularly when we deal with either finance or lawyers, they prefer that if you get an estimate that it's correct and validated. I I try to be more pragmatic and say, let's just give it a value. If this value is 100,000, it's good enough. It's close enough. This value is 150. Ultimately, we don't know, and you got to be okay with not knowing a lot of times in HR. That's at least my experience. But you got to, in the end, make a choice based on the available information at the time.
Yeah. I think that's true. And when you are making that choice, when you are kind of, going into the point where you have to make the call, who do you think ultimately owns the outcome of whatever that decision is?
So you think if say if whether it's the HR director, is that what you're thinking, or is it like
Yeah. So is it HR that owns the outcome of the decision? Is it the legal team? Who is sort of the person who's left making the call and then accountable for whatever happens based on the call?
So it truly depends on your organization structure and setup. I would say I've been very fortunate that this organization and the previous ones that I worked at, I'm in very close partnership with the CEO. So when it comes to people or legal decisions, we're not sitting alone. We're actually taking very deep conversations about do we do A, do we do B, and we challenge each other. So when we get to the stage of making a decision, we both know where we agree and we disagree, and then I can unfortunately say we are all in that together.
Yeah.
I rarely experience that legal really owns that outcome because legal is really, really good at assessing the facts that you give them. But
Hmm.
in the end, whether they win or lose is often down to did you give them all the facts? Like they're really, really strong in that area, but there's always a new fact that either you forgot to give them or that wasn't apparent until we really took on the case.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's either the combination of me and the CEO, or we have the trinity of the CFO, the CEO, and the CHRO. Those three, in many decisions, including the HR decision, have to work as an entity. And that's the same in
Yeah.
our commercial decisions. We don't make commercial decisions without HR and finance being involved either.
Yeah.
So why we wouldn't make the impactful people decision and legal decisions without this trio being fully connected. If one of us goes astray and take a decision on our own, I say some companies would do that. You're much more segregated in your decisions, but then you're also fully accountable for that decision
Yeah.
on your own.
Yeah.
And so I would say I thrive where maybe say whether it's finance, commercial, or HR decisions, we have three people at the table and we discuss it through. And of course, I'm the functional expert in some of these areas, as the CFO is on cash flows and balance sheet and P&Ls, right? But in the end, we got to ensure that we have an aligned understanding of what's our decision, and then we live with it as a team. Otherwise, I think
Yeah.
it can end up being a blame game, and it shouldn't.
Yeah, I agree. And I like that you put it as sort of that, that trinity that really kind of owns it too, especially in a case like this where the case itself also has an external component to it. So
Yeah.
there's the brand part, there's, the leadership decision that's going to come out of it. And that, the CEO being involved as just sort of the person who represents the organization at the very top. I do think you're right. It is important to kind of have them involved in that. And then the CFO too, obviously, because they're the ones that have to help do the math and make sure that the resources are going to go the right way, and then you as HR kind of have that functional expertise to sort of weigh in on where how involved or uninvolved you want to be in some of these things.
And might also add that everyone has a boss. So in my last company, I worked very close with the families that were the owners. So even if we inside the organization, this is the right thing to do, we would need to ensure with the family because the brand goes beyond the existing leadership group. That sticks with the company brand, right? So if we had a case like this in my last company, I would talk to the owners. Now the owners also have bosses, but they're called society and customers.
Yeah.
So that's also like it's not like just because you're the owner you can decide in isolation. No, it can have an impact on whether your customers can associate and relate to this. That is also why we sometimes must take the cases. If we don't, the customers may be left with the wrong perception of it. So I think again, ultimately, it's about following the money, but it's a tough game to do because it's so hard to attribute value to each element and the consequences.
Yeah. And I think, going back to something that you said earlier about legal being only as helpful as whether or not they have all the facts and they have the right information. It's why having really good documentation, I think, really matters too. So that, when you document performance reviews, exit interviews, everything that is part of the employee cycle has to be documented within your HR realm, right? Because that's how you find that documentation to know whether or not there are themes and patterns and maybe some of the claims being made. But that's also how you can know that all of the documentation does live somewhere and you're not trying to figure out, are there facts that live in other sources? Are there conversations that are happening that, we're not aware of, which is always going to happen, right? But if you have a really good sort of source of facts and documented situations to kind of do an investigation that you can provide to your legal team, I think that also kind of, it helps.
Absolutely, and I'm not against any kind of documentation. I think the trickiest part right now is that it's also not the only solution because just 15 years ago, like not every employee had a recording device of really high quality in their pocket in every meeting because everyone
Yeah.
today has a smartphone that does that.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure we can combat it only with recording everything. I think if anything, the AI, the like meetings are being recorded and transcribed live now as we speak. It's helping us with our minutes and our notes, but it perhaps creates more risk than it creates stability and certainty and protection. I don't know where it's heading in the coming period, but I just think that the documentation, yes, it should be there, but we can't document our way out of getting cases, and that sometimes a colleague or a former colleague would show up with more documentation that you thought they had, because not every place is and not every state is a dual consent state for recording.
Yeah. Yeah. This is true. There are always so many different nuances when you're working with teams in different locations, different countries, different states, because like you said, there's different rules. I mean, documentation can also live in just writing, in writing too, right? So if you have a performance conversation with an employee, document it, say this, we talked about this person performing well. We talked about this person performing poorly, right? I think that's like an important kind of piece is just remember to document because we always overestimate our ability to remember things. And so being able to, sort of at least look back and say, okay, these are the interactions that I had with this employee. It's not even necessarily, I think, about recording every single conversation because I agree sometimes it's just too much information too. And it's hard to sort out what's relevant, what's not. But if you can at least say, okay, these are performance conversations that were documented. These are exit interviews that were documented. Feedback that was documented, engagement surveys. I think that is sort of, those are helpful pieces to start to kind of put together, a story. And that's where AI comes in to kind of help, figure out the themes and patterns and things that kind of matter. Um,
For sure.
so I have one final question for us to close on because I know we're at time. But what's one piece of advice that you'd give an HR leader who's facing a scenario like this for the first time? And when I say scenario like this, let's say it's an employee who has been let go, has signed an agreement, and now they're posting on social media about their experience working there. What's advice that you have for someone in this position?
I think it goes to a lot of our HR situations. Just remembering ask more questions than you give answers.
Hmm.
Well, I think if you are an HR partner or an HR journalist or an HR colleague in general, then you're probably looking for more answers. But if you're an HR leader that's accountable for it, remember you're not paid for your own opinion, and you're paid for the depth of the questions you can ask that kind of unfolds the case for you in totality. When looking at a case like this, the criticism that was posted was the company's culture and treatment of women. There's like, I would also ask, do we have any data that actually supports that? And if your entire C-suite is purely white men, then I'm not sure it's a case you can win in the public eyes either, whether she was wrong or not. So I think it's just again remembering the higher you go in the hierarchy, the more you're paid for asking questions than giving specific answers. Now, if you do give answers, be sure that you really harness the organization's input from all the angles that you can, because ultimately you are paid for having an opinion, but it's not your opinion. My leader doesn't want to hear what Jens thinks about the case. He wants to hear what the organization thinks about this case. And my job is to funnel all that information in and saying, here is where I believe we need to go next. I can also just, I couldn't show up and just not say, I don't know. Like, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Like, you got to ask a lot more questions than you just, use your experience to draw a conclusion.
Yeah. I think that's great. That's just, the higher up you get in the hierarchy, the more you're paid for questions over answers. I think that's a really good sort of piece of advice. And you're right, because then that's sort of where we're not coming in with assumptions in situations like this. It's just come in with curiosity, start to kind of figure out what's true here, what's not true, what's a fact, what's an opinion, and just start to kind of, really get to finding out what the root of it is through really good questioning. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you again for being here. Thank you for chatting through this case with me. I know this is one that I'm not sure if it's been solved yet either. So, I'm definitely going to kind of look it up and see. I wonder where things are. And as we continue to navigate the world of social media and work, it'll be interesting to kind of see what precedent kind of gets set with cases like this too, and how much an employer can control what you say online or not, which is an active thing that we're witnessing here in the US. So, well, I guess we'll find out.
Yeah. Thank you. And thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, likewise. And thanks everybody for listening. Have a great day. Bye.